Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with Delaware's top minds and leaders, and they share their perspectives on how to advance FSE's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and elevate school board leadership across the state. And today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Rob Martinelli, a true champion of Delaware and the communities that he serves. As the CEO and president of Today Media, Rob has spent over 40 years spotlighting the stories and people that make this region thrive. From Delaware Today to Mainline Today, Delaware Business Times, and the Delaware Valley Italian American Herald, Rob's publications aren't just magazines, they're platforms for connection, conversation, and celebrating what makes Delaware unique. But Rob's impact goes far beyond publishing. He's deeply committed to giving back, and he serves on various boards, including the Delaware Business Roundtable, the Pete DuPont Freedom Foundation, and Big Brothers Big Sisters of Delaware. He's also in an advisory capacity on the board of Christiana Care and Leadership Delaware. And through his company's events like the Best of parties, Today Media has raised money and increased awareness for many charities and cultural arts programs across the state. So, Rob, we are thrilled to have you with us here today. I know you're a very, very busy person, doing so many great things for the community, and we do appreciate you spending the time with us today to share a little bit of your insights.
Sure, great to be here.
So you've often spoken about the importance of public education, and that was one of the things that really actually caught my attention early on when I came back to Delaware and I was trying to learn the landscape. And I was very impressed by the columns that you had written and the positions that you've taken. So why do you think, can we share with the audience, why do you think public education is important?
Well, it's essential, really, to the well-being of our state, our country. It's the way that people can lead a productive life. They can make a living for themselves and their families. So it's critical to have a great public education system.
And so in that regard, I mean, I would agree with you on all fronts. I think it unlocks human potential in a lot of ways. So how does Delaware's public education system impact the quality of life in the state?
Oh, it has a huge impact on the quality of life, because when people can't read, they can't do math, they can't write, the proficiency level is very low in the state. They drop out and they're not productive citizens. They may lead to crime or other problems that we have to deal with as a state. People move out of the state because of the public schools here. They live in Pennsylvania because the public schools are much better. So that's economic and quality of life that leaves Delaware.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that you see a lot of that, especially when you look at what's possible, right? Given the great publications and the things that you spotlight in all of your publications, we can see what is out there, how good it could be, right? And if the public school system is sort of leaving some of these folks behind, I guess that has implications for everyone.
That's right. It has, if we want to grow as a state, we need workers. Mm-hmm. The people are dropping out of school or they can't read and write. It's going to make that much more of a challenge to grow our economy, make things better for everybody.
Yeah. So education, you have, maybe we could share a little bit sort of about your educational journey and your background, what you've studied, and how those experiences really have helped you, just create a very successful portfolio of publications.
Well, I was lucky. I was blessed to have parents who believed in education. I went to a parochial school, and I grew up in New York, and went through 8th grade to a parochial school. Then I went to a school similar to Salesianum here in Delaware, and then to a Jesuit college at Holy Cross. So I was blessed to really have a great education, which gave me the foundation to, get involved in business. Even though I did go to law school, became a lawyer, I ended up gravitating back to the family business, and it's helped me immensely having that great education.
Yeah. And you've diversified.
Studies have shown that if people that graduate high school do much better than people that drop out, and as you go along, the more education I think leads to a higher lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those experiences, your education, even your background in law, did that help you? How did that help you, expand the portfolio? Because you didn't always have all of these publications.
No, I mean, I think the education, I was always curious. I was always, trying to learn. And certainly having the background in law helped to help grow our business. So I think it's learning is a big part of it. Learning the business and growing the business really comes from the solid background I had in education. I'm really lucky in that regard.
Yeah. Today's reality is a lot different from when you and I went to school. Given the rise of technology, AI, it's a global world now, and it wasn't so much, 40, 50 years ago. People still got around, but not instantaneously the way we can do today. So, given that, what are important things that you think schools need to keep in mind as they're preparing the workforce for the future? What's on the horizon in your industry?
Well, listen, I think the basics still apply. Reading, writing, and arithmetic
Mm-hmm.
is critical to a successful journey in life. Maybe now more science with all the technology that's hitting us. My business, it's constantly changing. We've had to pretty much put our business online and now try to reach people the way they want to get content. So that requires a lot of technology. So but still the basics of reading, writing, doing math is critical today, more than ever.
Yeah. Would you say critical thinking skills are also important, where you know how to assess a situation or an opportunity? I agree with you. You need the foundation, reading, writing, and math, but then this ability to think critically about situations.
Yeah, I mean that's very important. But today you don't necessarily need a college degree to have a great
Mm-hmm.
career, but you do need those foundational elements to be able to move on. I mean, there's a lot of great positions now that don't require a college degree. You can be trained. There are pathways in Delaware. I saw the governor just announced some efforts with apprenticeships. So there's a lot of ways to have a great career without necessarily having to go to college or going to a 4-year school. I mean, certainly that would help, but it's still, you have to have the basics. You have to be able to read, write, and do math.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that about the governor's announcement for apprenticeships. I think that's a great way to learn. I think, practical skills. But even that, in the printing industry, right? Like apprenticeships were kind of the way that people moved up, right? They got introduced and moved up. What did that look like to be an apprentice when you first started compared to what it will be, now with this generation?
Yeah, I mean, it's on the job training. It's like being an intern in a way. You go into a company, you're working in that company, you're learning the trade or the skill, the profession that that you may have an interest in. So it's a critical. We've hired a lot of people through internships, which I think they're similar. People that would become, would be an intern, like an editorial, become the editor of the magazine. So
Fabulous.
It's a great way to start a career.
Yeah. It's nice to know, and that as young people come in and they're in the state, and then you're offering the opportunity for a career. I think that another thing that's important in Delaware is keeping the talent here and not having people leave. That there are great jobs for them to have in career paths.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about sort of, we've expanded the focus in terms of education from beyond just what's kind of, schools, teachers, educators, to this larger community. And just to move to our second segment, let's talk a little bit about how you've used your publications, like Delaware Today or Delaware Business Times, to provide insights and information to families, the business, and community leaders. Why is it seems like you think that this conversation about education is important for the collective to have?
Absolutely. I think families need to know what's going on. They need to know the good, but also the bad. And that's what we try to do, just provide them with information on what's going on in our schools today.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important. Also, that it's a continuous conversation sometimes, and I don't know if you've seen this, but there'll be one story on one thing and then it's never revisited, And to me, it seems important that, like, there's a problem and then there's a sort of a continuous or an ongoing conversation so that we don't lose focus.
Right. I mean, that's part of holding people accountable, but that comes from educating families and the residents of the state to let them know what's really happening here.
Exactly. And you've written a lot. I mean, you've had, multiple times probably in each year about your position on education and why it's important. And I think that voice, especially coming from the business community, is critically important.
Yeah, I think it's, look, there are a lot of good things happening, but there's problems that have to be addressed and be addressed quickly. I mean, before COVID, Delaware was like in the middle of the pack in terms of the proficiency of reading, writing, and math. But after COVID, Delaware had one of the largest drops of any state in the country. And now we're like in the bottom 5 in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're spending, our per capita spending is like 9th in the country, yet we're not getting the results here. I mean,
Right.
it's staggering that 18% of our 8th graders are not proficient in math and only 24% in reading.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are children that are being moved on to high school and they can't do math and they can't read. This is a huge problem that has to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. And we've tried to do a lot of, elevating the data. FSE really wants to elevate the data and also support and train, to do a little plug, but to support and train board members, right, in knowing how to pull down the file, how to disaggregate the data, what to look for, right? I think, and I'd love to hear what you think, I think people want to solve the problem. I think what we need to do is sort of figure out the how, right? Like, I don't think people think that this is where we should be. I think everyone wants better.
I think everybody does, but it doesn't seem like we're able to move the needle here. Mm-hmm. We and I think part of it is, who's accountable? Is it the school board? Is it the superintendent? Is it the principal? Is it our legislators? Mm-hmm. Is it the Board of Education, Department of Education? Is it the governor? I mean, who's accountable, really? I saw legislators running for office last year on their track record in education. Mm-hmm. I mean, going from the middle of the pack to bottom 5 in the country is not a track record to be running on here.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's going to take, an effort by everybody to move the needle.
Yeah, I agree. It's a collective. I also agree. Everyone has a part to play. And in terms of challenges, like what do you see that are the challenges affecting the public school system? I mean, funding is a hot topic, right? Everyone's talking about, should there be more funds allocated? Teachers, the climate in the school. What do you think sort of are the big things that school district leaders are grappling with?
Well, I think the challenges are even greater today with the teacher shortages, the violence in schools, absenteeism, mental health issues. I mean, there's seemingly a lot more that we have to deal with today.
I love this, the issue of absenteeism. I think it's oftentimes overlooked as a driving factor. And to me, it seems so straightforward that if a child is not there, they can't learn because they're not there, right?
Right.
So I think looking at some of these sort of the root causes of some of the outcomes would also be helpful. Um, thoughts on how to prioritize? You're running a big business, right? How do you decide? And I'm sure you have many things, many challenges, many goals and things that you want to accomplish. How do you think through kind of what to go at first? What's the first order of business?
Well, I think somehow we have to get the principals in these schools the resources that they need, and the teachers, the principals and the teachers in the schools, the resources they need to be able to move the needle, to improve that school that they're running. And we need to be able to hold them accountable to doing that.
Right.
And that goes back to the principals who are picked by the superintendents. Superintendents are picked by the school boards. So there's a lot of different factors here. But
right.
I think the school boards need to start by their job is to pick the superintendent.
Yeah.
But they need to hold that superintendent accountable to a plan that's going to improve these schools.
Yep. And we're gonna get to that. You've done a great job. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of school districts. We have 19 of them that don't even have annual performance reviews for the superintendents. So the superintendent should be providing the strategic plan, working with principals and the teachers, and the board needs to hold them accountable to that plan.
Can you share a little bit with the audience about what your experience has been? Because you've been on boards and you have a board. So what's this process of evaluation look like from your perspective? What's your experience been when you go through this process of at the end of the year figuring out, how well did we do?
Well, you're setting goals. And the goals should be, we call them SMART goals. So first of all, it should be in writing. They should be measurable. They should be attainable. They should be relevant, and there should be a timeline. So, whether you want to pick proficiency in reading, math, writing, for this particular school, we're going to increase it by 10%, 20%. And, down the line, I mean, this should be something that everybody's involved with, creating these goals for our schools. Let me tell you a story, if I can. I can illustrate what can happen. And it happened in 2012 here in Delaware. It happened in Dover. It didn't happen in our legislature. It happened in a school called Booker T. Washington Elementary. Now, Booker T. Washington is on the west side of Dover. It's got a high percentage of low-income students. And they brought a new principal into that school. His name was Dale Kevin Brown. He was actually a retired principal from Maryland. So they brought him in there. And if you remember back then, Obama was president, there was this thing called Race to the Top. And Delaware got money. So Dale Kevin Brown got $250,000 for 3 years to use to improve that school. He was going to be held accountable for that school. They gave him money, resources to do what he did. And he did some things which were amazing and turned that school around, which, again, there was a huge achievement gap in that school. It's like 40 points. So the achievement gap being what the lower income kids' proficiency rate is versus kids that are coming from higher income backgrounds. And, again, they were in the teens when he started. But first thing he did, he set high expectations. Booker T. Washington, BTW, he said, I don't want to just close the achievement gap, he goes, I want Booker T. Washington to be best in the world. Very high expectations. Do you hear anybody setting high expectations here in Delaware?
Yeah, I think that leadership play is very, very important.
So he did that. Because he had the money, he was able to pay the teachers. He extended the school day. So he paid the teachers to work another, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, 4 days a week. And then he trained the teachers. You hear a lot about using data to drive instruction. Well, every day, the teachers were trained to get together, collaborate on which students didn't get that assignment that day. And then those students that afternoon, because they had the extra time, and because he was able to pay the teachers, they had these small group tutoring sessions for these children that didn't get the lesson that day. Mm-hmm. So he invested in the teachers. A lot of the grant money went to training and developing. The other thing he was able to do was he was able to put social workers in the schools. So, the teachers know that the children that are traumatized, they may have discipline problems or whatever it is. They know who they are. That afternoon, those children would be with a social worker in that extra time, helping them to deal with that. So, the thing is, and what happened was they went from being in the teens, from proficiency to when the 2017, 2018, 5 years later. Like, this is why I believe it can be done and it can be turned around quickly. So Booker T. Washington, where 66% of the children came from low-income families, 5 years later achieved math proficiency of 70% and English reading and writing of 71%. It was an amazing turnaround.
Yeah.
And so
that's a fantastic story.
What's that? Yeah. And
a fantastic story.
That's going to work for every school. But the point is that the principals and the teachers can get together in that school and create a curriculum for the improvement of that school. But they need resources to do that. So that, I think that story gives me hope that if we work together and, we try to put more resources back in the school, and that doesn't necessarily mean spending more money either. What's happened in Delaware, we have 19 school districts. Do we need 19 school districts? Do we need 19 superintendents and all the administration that they have? I'd like to see those superintendents start to put some of those people in the schools to help, to pay the teachers more. Maybe give the teachers a bonus if they hit the goal that we all agree, we're going to improve by X amount. But, it starts, it has to be a collaboration so that people buy into it. But I think the Booker T. Washington example is a good one to give us hope that it can be done, it can be turned around quickly.
I agree with that. Thank you for sharing that story. I don't know how many people in our audience had heard it before, and I think it's great to highlight that example. One of that actually like a best practice, but two, to give us hope. To say it can be done. And I like that you qualified what you're proposing and saying it's not one size fits all. You're not saying every school needs to do this exact same thing, but something along these lines.
But the principals and the teachers in that school, I'll bet they know what has to be done in that school. The problem today is things seem to take so long. You talked about funding. I mean, how many years we've been talking about funding? And now they're talking about coming out with a report in the fall, and then they want to extend it now for another year? Are you kidding me? I mean, why does everything take so long? Get the teachers, get these people together in a room, and let's work this out. Let's come up with a plan to actually set goals to improve these schools. Mm-hmm. It can be done. It should be done this spring so that we can work on it over the summer and be ready to go in September.
Yeah, I love this. I think it's great. I think your urgency, your sense of urgency is right on point. And I think this timeline of like, okay, school year's going to end. When do I need the money? When am I going to plan? When do the doors open again? Right? Like just sort of a practical application of how do you do this work. I love that. I think that's great.
We're spending, I think it's 2.6 billion. It's probably even more now. Delaware has the 9th highest per capita spending in the country. The Department of Education alone has a budget of $400 million. I mean, you can't tell me that some of those funds couldn't be redirected to get the resources into the schools where they're needed and cut back on this administration. If you look at the trends in spending in Delaware, we're proportionally spending much more on administration than we are on putting resources in the schools. I did principal for a day a few years ago. I was shocked when teachers would tell me that they're going out and spending money out of their own pocket for supplies because they don't have supplies. I mean, something's wrong here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because one of the things this podcast is intended to do is to raise topics that we think all Delawareans should be talking about, right? And I'm not hearing you say specifically take from X and give to Y. I think you're saying look at what you're spending on X and look at your need on Y and figure out, is that what you should keep doing, right? Is the resource better spent in a new area? And I think that if we had communities around the state that were going to school board meetings and having this conversation, if there was public discourse around it, but there's really not. These aren't the conversations that just Delawareans are having when they're going about their day-to-day business. And I think it's needed.
Absolutely.
So to move into our third and final segment, just we touched on it a little bit, but you excel at strategic planning and goal setting. And I'm curious if you could share, and I'm sure you have several, so ones that are most important to you, but how the strategic planning has driven the success of your business. How do you go about, you said SMART goals, right? But how do you make sure that like everyone's clear on what you're trying to achieve, and what is that strategic planning process that people talk about?
So it's a process whereby you look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that you face, and from that, you want to keep your strengths. We want to seize on the opportunities, and we want to improve our weaknesses. So, you set goals around those things with, tactics on how to achieve it. But I think you also include a lot of people a lot of people should have a voice in this so that, this buy-in, whether you're dealing with the school board. I know you're focused on school boards. They appoint the superintendent. That superintendent is the one that should be doing the strategic plan and presenting it to the board for approval. And the board then should hold the superintendent accountable. And if a weakness is that 18% of our 8th graders are, that's the proficiency in math and 24% in reading. Well, how do we improve that? There should be some goals around improving that. And then, down to the principals in the school and the teachers, the superintendent appoints the principal for that school. But is he giving them the resources that principal and those teachers need to achieve the goal? That's an important thing. What are the resources that are needed? I mean, but it doesn't necessarily mean spending more money. It might mean spending more money, but there may be resources in the district that can be reallocated into that school to give that principal what he needs to achieve the goals. And if the goal is, in 5 years, we want to be in the top 10 schools in the country. Well, what are the top 10 schools? What are their proficiency rates? Now you know where you got to get. So how do we get from A to B in 5 years? And you start with a 1-year plan. And then every year you look at it to say, how did we do? Did we hit the mark? Did we exceed it? Did we fall short? And you keep changing it, but hopefully along the way you're improving. We're making improvements so that in 5 years, maybe the proficiency rate is 50% or 70%. Why not set a goal of making Delaware the best schools in the world? I mean, why not really set some high goals for ourselves?
Right.
I mean, think about, people would be knocking to get into the state. We had the best
Yeah.
in the world.
Yeah.
And don't think that businesses don't look at that. Like, I'm going to move my business to Delaware, but the average proficiency is where it is. So I'm going to send my kids to private school, or maybe they're going to live in Pennsylvania and work in Delaware. I mean, businesses look at that when they think about expanding their business or moving here.
Yeah, and it's sad because I think that the proficiency rates don't, they're not an indication of the quality of the educators in the room, right? I mean, I think we have great teachers, we have committed professionals, we have, sufficient funding. One thing that you made me think of, though, when you have a strategic plan, if a district has a strategic plan, would you say then that their budget for that year, I have my strategic plan for 3 years and I'm in year one. Should my budget should someone be able to look at my budget and see what I'm investing in and be able to walk it back to the goals that I've set?
From what perspective?
To see, like, if my goal is to improve, third grade reading, does my budget reflect an investment in things that impact third grade reading?
Absolutely. I mean, you want to have goals so say the goal is to improve it by 10% this year. Well, what's needed? What are the resources needed to make that happen? And that's the principal and the teachers getting together and say, we need tutors. We need, I don't know what it is, but I'm sure
they know. They know exactly. Right? And that was my last question for you, because this has been a great conversation, and I'm walking away with so much new information and perspective. So thank you. But my final question is around, how do you get everyone to, all of the people who are impacted, all of the interested parties? How do we, there's not one answer, right? But what are some ideas for making sure everyone's voice is included so that there is buy-in and that there is commitment, and people say, this isn't just the strategic plan that the superintendent rolled out. This is something that me as a member of this district or a member of this community, I support too.
I think you have to include parents. You have to include teachers, principals. Everybody should have a voice in creating this plan. And that's how you get buy-in, because everybody feels like they contributed to the plan. And, they feel it's, again, realistic, attainable, and, they have buy-in. That's how you get buy-in. A lot of it's communication, and then continuing to communicate on the progress that you're making.
Yep. That's great. Well, Rob, thank you for an amazing conversation. You've given us so much to think about. I think I agree with you 100% about why public education matters, that it is something that all Delawareans need to be focused on. The importance of, the basics, making sure that the reading, writing, and arithmetic are all taken care of, and that individuals are positioned for a prosperous life. And then this idea of aligning resources, making a strategic plan, and coming up with, like your example from Booker T. Washington was that, we said we had a goal with measurable outcomes. We invested some resources, and they turned it around with a great leader. So those were fabulous examples to share. And I want to thank you. Thank you for what you do for Delaware, and thank you for your commitment to public education.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for what you do.
Thanks. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in for another episode of First Aid Educate's Leading Together podcast. Until next time.